Good morning and welcome to today's webinar discussing results to a recent survey we did on tourism and hospitality businesses in Minnesota. I'm Ron Wirtz, Regional Outreach Director at the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis. So before I move into the content portion of our webinar, which will be very shortly, I have just a few housekeeping items. Today's webinar actually is a part of a series of webinars on regional economic conditions, most of which we do to feature our survey work in a variety of fields, including construction, manufacturing, professional services, general businesses, and also the worker experience. There will be a link in the chat box where you can find those past webinars, as well as this webinar once we're done here. Today's webinar will feature two parts. So I'm going to cover the survey results in the first part of this webinar and go into some depth. And the second half will feature a moderated Q&A with two of my partners in this survey who I'll tell you more about later, but they are Gretchen Nussbaum of Explore Minnesota Tourism and Angie Whitcomb of Hospitality Minnesota. I really appreciate their participation today and their help with this survey. I will be moderating that Q&A session and would love to get questions from the audience that I can pose to our panelists. So at any point during this event, if you have a question, please type it in the chat box. We're going to cover a lot of ground today. Slides for this presentation and a copy of the video link, because we are recording today, will be emailed to all registered attendees sometime next week, hopefully. We encourage you to share all of this content with others if you find it useful. Lastly, we'd really like to get your feedback at the end of these presentations. We'd like to know what you think about these. So please take a moment to fill out the 30-second survey that pops up in your Zoom window when you exit the webinar itself. So with that, let's turn to the content itself. And before I get too far ahead of myself, I need to give you this disclaimer that the views that I express here are mine and not necessarily those of the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis or the Federal Reserve System. I want to tell you just a little bit about the survey itself. So our focus today is this survey we call the Tourism and Hospitality Survey. It's a quarterly, actually, I apologize. We've recently made this a tri-annual. I apologize, I didn't update that. It's a tri-annual survey in partnership with Explore Minnesota Tourism and Hospitality Minnesota. We do it in the winter in January, and then again in May, and again in August. And this partnership that we've established with the three of us was actually put together just before the pandemic. So we've been doing this almost 5 years now. And this survey specifically was conducted from August the 19th through the 30th. We had 266 responses, which is almost identical to the number we had last August. So some real quick takeaways just to kind of set the tone here. Unfortunately, I don't have a lot of great news in terms of some of the indicators that we look at. Respondents generally said it was a fairly poor summer overall in terms of revenue. Their overall financial health was okay, but we're seeing some erosion in that. Some of the biggest challenges are some of the same challenges that we've seen in the past, inflation and wages in particular, but there are others. We're seeing pressures for both inflation and wages ease in terms of what people are reporting, but it seems like firms are not necessarily feeling that any relief. Hiring is also softened pretty noticeably. On the good side of that is that labor availability has gotten better. The outlook has declined from last year. Overall, it's almost exactly neutral, which I'll explain a little bit later. And I want to note too, each partner has their own interpretation of results. We all have our different viewpoints. So the Q&A is going to give our partners some opportunity to offer some additional views and insights and nuance to how they are seeing the data as well. I'm going to go through a lot of data right now, and I'm going to go through it relatively quickly. One of the reasons we want to share the PowerPoint after is that you'll have a better chance to kind of sit and read it and come to some of your maybe your own conclusions as it relates to survey results. So let's start talking first about revenue trends, kind of one of the more important ones, obviously. And first, before I get into the results themselves, you'll see a lot of charts that are like this, basically kind of a temperature gauge. So it's how to read these charts for those that haven't been to one of these webinars before is red means bad or generally decline, and green means good or generally growth. And this way I can often compare things for two different questions or two different things at the same time. And also I'll show you some charts over time to show you how things have changed. So in general, I think not hard to interpret this. We're seeing almost 50% have seen some decline in revenue compared with last year. Again, I want to stress that it doesn't mean they were necessarily unprofitable or that revenues were necessarily bad. You may have had a really great year and revenues declined from last year. But again, just on its face, what we saw is that roughly half of respondents saw revenue decline from last year, and only about a quarter see increase. Um, in general, it seems pretty clear that the pandemic boom has really wore off, and that we're seeing some adjustments throughout the sector. In terms of trends over time, this is a little bit more obvious how that shine has kind of come off. So the summer of 2021, when everybody was getting outside and going on vacation and trying to stay separate, was really a remarkable year. And since then, we maybe thought that 22 and 23 were maybe kind of the new normal, kind of flattening out a little bit. And since then, obviously, we've seen some further decline. We also asked because we knew that in June there was considerable rain and other events, flooding, that we knew probably had some impact. So we asked a special question on whether or not flooding and other severe weather had any impact. I would say a couple of things. Roughly half of respondents said there was some impact, especially the June flooding on their revenue for the year. The hard part to know, though, is every year seems some severe weather. I don't know that we've ever gotten through a summer where there isn't some severe weather that affects business. So we don't know to the extent that this is really influencing our overall results real negatively. So the expectations for the fall, so things haven't been great over the summer. So we're kind of interested, well, what do you see in the fall and shoulder season compared to the same period last year? Unfortunately, we're seeing a little bit better. So we don't see half of respondents saying that they expect things to decline, but it's still more negative, more that expect revenue decline than expect revenue growth. So that's not a great sign either. So we also ask our respondents to give us just a little bit of information on their firm, so we can kind of take a look at both some firm demographics as well as where they are in the state. And so we break it down into 4 different groups: kind of the goods and services, suppliers, food and drink, attraction, entertainment, and then overnight accommodation. And again, here what you're seeing is really the only sector that is even close to par is accommodation. And even there, just anecdotally, what we see in the data as well as anecdotally talking to people is that generally they've been seeing lower occupancy, but their average roommates have remained fairly healthy. So I think that's one of the reasons they're a little bit closer to par. And then the other sectors seem to be having more difficulty. So we also ask firms to tell us where they are located so we can see if there are really any regional trends. And what I would say here is that the interesting part is there are really no regions doing well. Kind of the curious part is that the region doing the best, and still not great, but better than the others, is the southern region. And I was kind of interested to see if weather was playing any effect there, because we know what happened in some of the southern parts of the state, the Mankato area, etc. And actually, the southern area was the area that actually reported the worst flooding or the worst weather impacts, yet they were the ones that were apparently doing better than other regions. So we know that there are a lot of challenges out there in the economy and in this sector. So we always ask this question for people to identify 2 of the biggest challenges among this list. And as has been the case for some time, is that price inflation is still the #1 problem, and by a large margin, as you can see here. So just kind of working our way down from there. Wages crept up to #2, but only because it stayed the same, because some others actually came down a little bit. And again, here you're looking at the green bar in terms of ranking. Government relations government regulations did see an increase, and we don't know exactly why, possibly from the implementation of the paid sick and safe law that happened this year. And then lastly, the one area that really improved is labor availability. So went from roughly 1 in 3 saying it was a problem to more like 1 in 4. So there was some improvement on that. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. So with inflation being still the big deal, we still ask about pricing and how they are not only perceiving it um, at the retail level, but also at the wholesale level. And here what you see there, so their price changes over the last 12 months, the top one being from vendors, the bottom one is that would be the prices that they charge to their customers. And what we're seeing has been a fairly common trend. The wholesale price hikes, what our respondents are reporting is that the wholesale inflation is still higher than what they are charging to their customers. And so they are eating a lot of that price increase, trying to keep prices a little bit more stable for customers. What we are seeing is that the long-term trend is improving, um, uh, I would say modestly, but pretty steadily. So here you have a chart that shows that same question over the last 4 summer surveys. And the chart on the left that reflects wholesale price changes here in August, you can see that it was not great, but it was a little more stable. And then you see the real big jump in August of 22. And since then, you're seeing a real steady decline in what respondents are reporting in terms of the price increases at the wholesale level. You see exactly the same pattern in terms of the retail price changes. I would say because those never got as high as wholesale. You're seeing a little bit softer decline in that, but you are still seeing the same exact pattern that prices that are being reported are going down, especially at the highest, especially among those levels or those increases that were at the highest levels, the 5 and 10%. And one last point on that I almost forgot to make is, what this seems to reflect is that they're saying it's still a big challenge, even though things are getting better. And that's probably because they're not really feeling like there's a lot of relief in terms of prices when they are simply going up more slowly rather than maybe what they would prefer is they actually fall. I'm sure everybody out there who's listening, who's running a business would love to see lower prices from their vendors rather than just seeing prices go up more slowly. So those increases upon increases are probably what's making them feel that, I'm really not getting any relief here, even if the rate of change is going down. So talk a little bit about workforce and wage trends here. Um, so the chart here, so we're asking them to identify what their general hiring is, what's happening right now on the ground. And two things here. There's still net hiring going on, fairly notably, actually. What I would say the difference, though, is that it's much slower than it was previously in other surveys. We didn't ask this exact question, so I can't show you how this has changed over time because the question has changed a little bit. But what I can, just in kind of eyeballing some of our previous surveys, is the share that's hiring more full-time staff has dropped fairly significantly. They are also hiring to replace more turnover than they were previously. I think a lot of businesses have managed to staff up over the last couple of years, and so now I think it's a little bit maybe more of a maintain. And there's still turnover, so they're hiring, but maybe just to replace those that have left. And then we're seeing a fairly notably larger share that are not hiring at all, and there is a slightly higher share that are cutting workers. So in previous surveys, it was probably half of the amount that you see on your screen here. The good news from not hiring and other hiring, because they're not hiring, we're seeing labor availability improve fairly significantly. So if you look at the bars on the very left, those that say that it's very tight, the share that this year has been cut in half from what we saw 4 years ago. So that's, again, if you are out there looking, you're probably having much better luck. Doesn't mean you're having good luck, but better luck than you were even last year. And again, I think this is really, if you look at the bars on the very right, the share that is not hiring right now has jumped fairly significantly. We do still ask about what firms are trying to do in order to find labor. Now, don't try to read this chart, all the way down the graph. What I'm doing kind of here is a little bit more for effect. Firms are still trying to do a lot of things to try to attract labor when and where they need it. Remember, there's still roughly half of firms are looking to hire someone, even if they're just trying to fill turnover. But one of the things that they're still doing, or excuse me, the thing that you should take from this chart is that they are doing slightly less of most things that they were doing last year. So if you look at where the yellow bars are, that's last year, and then the green bars are this year. So you see some yellow bars are kind of sticking out, and where you're seeing some of those things there. Employers are finding, probably because they're having a little bit more luck in the labor market, they're doing fewer of those things, not dramatically. And we're still seeing, for the two big things, the increased wages they're still worried about that and still doing that, and they are still working on flexibility for scheduling. So those two things are remaining quite robust, and they're still the biggest things that firms are doing. They are, as I mentioned, they are still looking to increase wages. And what we are seeing is there's a little bit, the wage pressure is still present. We are still seeing increased wages for most firms. So that roughly 3 out of 4 are still increasing wages to some degree. And what they are also doing is that, or what they're thinking, hoping, is in the coming 12 months, because we always want to know what their expectations are, is that they are saying that they expect wage pressure to continue to ease a little bit. In the past, we've been asking this question during the entire pandemic. Earlier, when labor availability was really tight, I was a little skeptical at that happening, and it sort of didn't for a little while. I think it was maybe a little bit of wishful thinking. Today, I think that the idea that maybe wages will continue to dampen a little bit probably is a little bit more realistic. And I say that a little bit because that's the trend we're seeing right now. Again, you see the run up in wages through August of 22. Okay, and now we're starting to see a steady retreat from that peak wage growth. And again, if you go back to one of the very first slides, revenues have been soft. We're also seeing that hiring has been soft. So the idea that maybe average wages are going to continue to ease probably isn't wishful thinking anymore. Financial health and outlook. So we also kind of want to know, where are you currently, just as revenues are one thing, but in terms of long-term viability, where are you in terms of your financial health? Again, here I would say, we're seeing most firms are in a stable position, but we are seeing that erode. So not only the share that are growing, that dark green has been falling, but also the red, those that are either stable but negative or declining, also has been creeping up. So that's a concern as well. In terms of, again, some of those breakouts, I don't know that I would note anything particular here. Everybody's seeing kind of the same trend. In terms of the regional, we are seeing a little bit more in the Northeast. I don't know exactly why. The thing I would point to is that we did see that the share that are in the Northeast that are reporting revenue declines has been larger. So that seems to, kind of fall in place. And then in terms of the sectoral, food and drink and allied respondents also reported more revenue declines than the others. But again, I would say generally speaking, we're seeing some erosion kind of across the board. In terms of the outlook, again, this is 23 in the yellow versus this year's 24 in the green. And generally what you're seeing here is that things are dead even. If you just take a look at the green only, basically dead even. So we're seeing equal shares that are optimistic and neutral and pessimistic. So it's basically 1/3 across the board. So it's about as neutral as you can get. The thing that's maybe a little bit more worrisome, though, is you always like to look at what's the trajectory. And right now, the trajectory for the outlook, it has worsened. So it's not as good. It wasn't particularly positive last year, but it was definitely a net optimistic. And now we've seen that it's moved to just flat neutral. In terms of, again, some of those breakouts, in terms of businesses in the metro and central regions, we got a little bit better outlook there, and also in the attraction, entertainment, and allied sectors. Those are the most optimistic. I would say generally the bar is pretty low, though. So just to recap real quickly, and then we'll get into some of the Q&A. So growth has stalled in the sector. I think we have to be straight up on that, and we're just seeing more businesses reporting declining revenue. No region as I read it, and maybe Angie and Gretchen can offer some insights here too if they see anything differently, but I don't really see any region or industry subsector that is really seeing wildly different results. Some are better, but it's mostly in the margins. Inflation and wage pressure still both improving, but I don't know that respondents are necessarily feeling that much relief from either. Again, because of some of these compounding effects that we've seen from higher increases in the past. Hiring has slowed noticeably. That's something obviously that the Federal Reserve pays very close attention to. That in general, they're hiring fewer full-time workers, or many are not hiring at all. Labor availability is better, which hopefully if things pick up, that might benefit some looking for work as well as those looking to hire. But again, I think part of it is because there's been slower hiring. So hopefully if things pick up, we might see some labor availability get a little bit tighter again. Overall financial health is still positive on net, but I think there's definitely been some erosion in the overall financial health of the sector that I think we're definitely paying attention to. Outlook neutral. I think it's very safe to say this is a very cautious group right now in terms of what lies ahead. And so for all of the businesses that are out there listening here, I wish you very much luck. I know it's tough circumstances and heading into the shoulder season. I wish everybody full hotel rooms and full restaurants. So with that, I do want to bring other people have other perspectives to share, and we have two of those with us today, and I want to thank them. Before we get to the Q&A itself, I want to remind everyone we're taking questions via the chat box. Okay, and for those, if you could submit those, I will try to take a look as we have a conversation. And let me bring our two guests in, Gretchen Nussbaum, who is a research analyst with Explore Minnesota Tourism, and she helps coordinate this survey along with Angie Whitcomb, who is the CEO and president for Hospitality Minnesota. Thank you both for joining me today. I appreciate it. Let me stop sharing and bring you on screen. Welcome, Gretchen and Angie. For one, again, let me just say thanks for this partnership. This is really useful information to the Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis. I assume it's useful to your organizations as well. It's been a great partnership, so thank you for the partnership, and thank you for joining me today to bring your additional insights. So there's kind of two areas that I would like to start with before I turn it over to audience questions. And Gretchen, I'm going to start with you. I'm wondering, I would say these results not necessarily positive. I'm curious kind of what some of your takeaways were, and any additional findings in the survey that you think might be important to bring to the audience.
Yeah, definitely. And first, thank you for having me and Explore Minnesota here. Happy to be back for another year of this webinar and to also be continuing the survey partnership. As you said, the results, they were somewhat of a surprise. I'd say not a huge surprise, although the sentiment that's coming through in this survey is different from what we see from other data sources that we track regularly. I'm going to take the time to just go into that in a little bit of detail. So first, looking at hotel metrics, saw that it was a good summer in June, July, and August, particularly in the metro. If we look at the state level, hotel occupancy was up in August 2.7% to a total of 70% occupancy. ADR was up 4.8% year over year for that month of August to 145. And RevPAR was up 7.5% to $101, almost 102. So that's for the state. We have all those metrics up in August, saw similar trends in June and July. And then if we look at the metro in August, the percentages are even higher. So hotel occupancy was up 6.6% to 74.3 overall. ADR up 5.7 to $143.67. And RevPAR up 12.7% to $106.70. So that hotel metric is something that we look at very closely month over month year round. Then two other metrics we look at are leisure and hospitality employment from Deed. That increased in the summer as well, on average 2.2% over last summer. And then looking at airport data, That was also up this summer, including in August, it was up 8.45% relative to last summer. So we really take all these inputs together. We take this sentiment survey seriously, but we look at it in conjunction with the other data pieces when we're thinking about how to move our campaign forward into the coming seasons.
Thanks, Gretchen. I really appreciate you kind of bringing additional data kind of to the table. I think that's really good context. Angie, I'm guessing that you're in the data, but you also really talk to a lot of businesses that are involved here. I'm curious what your take is, maybe based on what you heard, for some of the survey results. I'm sure you've looked at them yourself, as well as some of the things that Gretchen has brought to the table. What do your members say?
Yeah, Ron. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. And you might have noticed I had to switch to my phone since tech check. So I appreciate your patience with this. The data is, Gretchen did a great job outlining it. And yes, if you look at those numbers, Metro was up, our hotels were up, and that feels good. But if you look at the big picture, they're doing more with less. And so the numbers say one thing, but in talking to our members, they're not feeling that this is, the best of times, right? And we're still trying to find where we're going to land post-pandemic and looking at what made it a good summer. We were optimistic with the Metro numbers because they were so good, and they were that good without all of the same activities we had here last year. So looking as we look to bring back Minneapolis and bring back conventions and bring back events, we hope to see that continue, but it's not, I'm going to be Debbie Downer on this call. It's not, it's a moment in time. It is not a full year of success and trend in the right way.
Right. And I would just kind of throw in just some of my own anecdotes, in the sense that I've been trying to triangulate a lot of different things. A lot of sources that I talk to in the industry don't suggest that things are terrible. Things are maybe less good than what they were, but I'm also a data person. So the survey results suggest that people are seeing some decline. So again, you're not exactly sure. And I think maybe in this point in time, whether or not there's a pivot coming or something like that. That's why it is really useful to hear the both of you kind of bring your additional perspectives on, because it's hard to say any point in time survey is exactly what is happening. You kind of don't know where we are on the trend line. We try to do as good a job as we can, but not everything necessarily fits in an easy to interpret box. So I appreciate both of your insights. So I am curious, Angie, I'm going to start with you on this question. Certainly things are happening in the industry, and I guess I'm curious, for both of your organizations, what are you focusing on and acting on as a result of what you're learning from these surveys?
Yeah, great question, Ron. At HM, we're really focusing on workforce and government mandates. That's where we're spending the majority of our time. So if you look at our survey results, we report that fewer people feel like the labor market is still tight, but with nearly 70% of them not hiring or just simply backfilling turnover, I think that there's a narrative there that's not necessarily aligned with relief. When you think about the cost of retaining employees and how that has increased so significantly, with higher wages and increased flexibility being the top retention tools that employers are using, and you layer in the increased cost based on recent employer mandates, we find that our members are needing to do the same amount of work or more work with fewer employees to break even, or worse, as we talked about, experience a revenue decline. As I talk to our resorts across the state, the lack of seasonal workers is a constant source of pain for our membership. For our resort and seasonal properties, temporary guest workers are essential to their being able to successfully run their daily operations. And I have members who rely very heavily on temporary guest workers to complete these just to run their resorts. And I talked to one member last week, and for the last 2 years, he's not been able to secure the same number of H-2B visa workers that he's used to and that he needs. And when you think about that program not being right-sized to fit the economy in the last 34 years, I mean, that's something we're certainly taking a look at and advocating for expansion of that program, just to try to catch up to the need. We realize that short-term needs are not going to fix this. So you asked what our association is doing. We're really investing both in our hotel space, but also in our restaurant space on long-term strategies that will expand and upskill potential workforce populations to help develop that strong pipeline for years to come. We support students we start them in high school and who are pursuing higher education in hospitality and related degrees, partnering with trade schools, creating apprenticeship opportunities and specialized workforce training programs for kind of those untapped and untraditional or non-traditional labor populations. And we really see this as a both and solution, short term, and then consistent long-term pipeline building initiatives. And that's a long-winded answer to tell you what we do every day here.
All right. Thanks, Angie. Gretchen, what about at Explore Minnesota?
Yeah, so our daily work is more focused on our marketing campaign. And this year we launched a first of a kind campaign with our Store of the North campaign. It's focused on promoting Minnesota as the best place to visit, live, work, and do business. So spending our resources in a lot of different ways. We're running our normal seasonal campaigns and drive markets, bringing people in from surrounding states, including areas of Winnipeg as well. But then we also run nationally niche campaigns that are focused on certain activities. So going into this fall, we're focusing on hiking and mountain biking, in the winter, performing arts and winter outdoor sports. We also know that based on last winter weather can be unpredictable. So we're keeping that in mind, also so that we're marketing to activities people can participate in different types of weather. Also specifically looking at those international markets that have direct flights into MSP, marketing to those international audiences. Already with our Store of the North campaign, we're doing initial research and seeing positive results. We hire a vendor to do this, and what's come back from survey-based research there is that our campaign is viewed positively by 84% of people, which is quite a bit above the 70% benchmark. So we're really proud of that. Continuing to look as we go into the next seasons, how we can collaborate with the industry to spread visitors around the states and into different types of activities. And continuing this Star of the North effort that combines livability and tourism to get the halo effect, because these efforts really work together. Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Gretchen. So I'm going to take a question from Lori online, and her question is, you said that there's some growing concern about government relation, and that I mentioned the sick and safe leave. And she was wondering if what other things were mentioned by responders, or maybe a better question is, what do you generally hear from the market? And Angie, I'm kind of looking at you here. What other things, as it relates to this topic, do you hear most often?
That's a great question. We hear minimum wage increases in our industry. I hear a lot from our members about the lack of the tip credit, the inability to tip pool, and really create less of a difference between the front of the house and the back of the house and what they're able to pay them. And you layer in any sort of additional cost via a labor mandate. It's the argument I hear is not, we don't want to take care of our people. It's trust us to do it ourselves instead of adding these additional burdensome costs. When you look at a margin that's, pre-tax 3 to 5%, 1% may not seem a lot, but 1% on top of 1% on top of 1%, it adds up. So that's what we hear mostly. It's not, we don't want to take care of our people. It's, we can't afford to do it the way you're asking us to.
We have a question here from Dan. And his question is, considering we are seeing an increase in the number of respondents reporting a decline in financial health, what do you think respondents will be doing if there's a potential tightening of the belt? And this kind of relates to a question that I was also curious in that maybe this is kind of a dual question, so just maybe pick out what you're interested in. I'm kind of curious if we are seeing maybe return to pre-pandemic consumer habits. At one point everybody wanted to go camping. They wanted to be outside because of some of the COVID-19 spatial concerns and things like that. And I'm wondering if either of you are seeing some transition back to old consumer habits. And if we are doing this tightening of the belt, is that maybe evident in some of that? Gretchen, let me go to you first.
Yeah. So I think there are continually shifts going on. As you said, outdoor rec was particularly popular, in at the height of the pandemic, but outdoor rec is always something that's important for Minnesota and a reason why people come here. And I don't think that's going to change. I think, people are more comfortable now going to a range of events. Again, looking to another data source, the Longwoods National Survey recently found that 91% of leisure travelers nationally are planning a trip in the next 6 months. And so, we know that there really is still this big appetite for travel. I think people are sometimes traveling differently, either, planning a little bit more of a last minute trip, spending less on non-essentials. And so there are shifts, I think we're going to see how this plays out as these operational factors change as well. Maybe as inflation eases and hiring isn't so tough, it will be easier for businesses, in the coming months. Also, I agreed with the point you made that, we definitely in those post-pandemic years had a boom. We knew that that wasn't going to continue. And it's just now, I think we're figuring out what normal is. It's still not completely clear.
Angie, thoughts on that question?
Yeah, I think Gretchen hit a lot of the great points, and you hope that it's a pre-pandemic leveling, but that's just, we're talking consumer traffic. To Gretchen's point, we need inflation to come down. We need all of these other factors to match that and level out as well. I hate to be the Debbie Downer all the time, but if the cost of doing business keeps increasing and traffic is declining and businesses have to raise their prices, it's going to be real interesting to see what consumer behavior looks like when we do our next survey. At some point, families are just not going to be able to travel or go out to a restaurant and be comfortable paying $25 for a hamburger where they're maybe getting it for $19 today. So it's going to be an interesting story to watch play out, and I'd like to see all of it come to a more level.
So Robin asked a question somewhat similar to that, in that she was wondering how much of among those firms reporting an increase in revenue is simply due to higher prices and inflation, and not necessarily, actually more business, more traffic. Any insights on that particular question, Angie?
I would say that definitely plays into that data point. They're having to charge more, like we said, to make the same or slightly increase. And their costs are going up in-house too, just to retain their employees. So I do think that is a piece of it. Definitely.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that's a piece of it. We did have some positive comments where people were either talking about how they've expanded their offerings. And so I think there are cases where revenue and traffic are up, because of changes the business is making. They have different things to appeal to different customers. Also, I'm recalling that a respondent from the Rochester area, spoke particularly well about development that Mayo is doing there and about the outlook there. And so, I think it's, again, this combination, and it's hard to have, really get an exact, cause and effect and, what exactly is driving what percentage of the response. But we know that, inflation is tough for a lot of people. And in other cases, adaptation is happening and leading to this positive outlook.
So the last question, I think then we'll wrap up today, is a little bit on the outlook. So it was very neutral. Roughly the same percentage is optimistic as pessimistic, and neutral, kind of 1/3 across. Tell me how you see, or tell me what your outlook is sort of as we move into the shoulder season, and any signals that you're looking for that might suggest some better or worse things are in the offing. Gretchen, let me start with you.
Yeah, I'm going to go back to, our marketing campaign, and that we have these niche activities. We learned from last winter and the warmer than usual weather that, this winter to really think about a range of activities people can do. So we're prepared for that, as well as we're getting initial good study results when we look at the impact of our Star of the North campaign. 97% of people said that when they go to our website, it increases their perception of Minnesota. So I think, there are positive things. We're committed to continuing to do the work to make Minnesota the best place to live, work, and do business. So I think we're just going to keep at that and hope that, you know, the industry and the environment level out, and that we have a better fall and winter.
Great. Thanks, Gretchen. Angie, any final thoughts?
I just, we're cautiously optimistic, and this may not be the popular answer, but we also have an election coming up. And I think that's going to determine how our membership at HM is really feeling and looking to the future. So hopefully we stay at neutral or slightly positive, and hope for the best. I think if we have a good winter this year, that will make a big difference. Weather does play an impact, and all indications say we will have snow this year. So it's going to be an interesting story to watch play out. And there's just so many factors and variables, Ron, that, I guess we'll see you again in 4 months and we'll talk about what happened.
Okay, great. I appreciate that, Angie. And yes, I am, as an ice fisherman, I am praying for cold and snow. Maybe not everybody is, but I am with you on that. So let me just say thank you again to Angie Whitcomb from Hospitality Minnesota, to Gretchen Nussbaum from Explore Minnesota Tourism. That is the last of our questions today. Thank you so much for joining us, for all those attendees. Please remember to fill out the brief survey that will pop up in your Zoom box when you exit. And again, thank you to everyone for showing up today. We wish all of the businesses watching a great fall and winter. We wish you much luck and full room. So with that, this concludes our webinar, and have a great rest of your day. Thanks.